Sister Evelyn Harrow thought she was following faith, but in truth she was following Marcus Ellery, a man whose obsession with divine discovery would lead them both into the heart of Egypt's desert, where devotion turned to delusion, and only a Bible was left behind to tell their story. Sister Evelyn Harrow had lived her entire adult life within the gray stone walls of St. Bernadette's convent in Bristol. Every day followed a rhythm of silence, prayer, and service. Her world was small but peaceful, filled with morning masses, children's laughter from the parish school, and the quiet companionship of other nuns who had long accepted the simple life of devotion. Evelyn was 32 but carried herself with a grace that seemed much older, her voice always calm, her eyes soft but searching. She had once been a university student studying theology before she chose the veil, leaving behind a promising academic career for the life of faith. No one at the convent ever questioned her choice, until the day she vanished. It began on an ordinary Tuesday. The morning bell rang, echoing through the corridors as the sisters prepared for prayer. Evelyn's bed was neatly made, her Bible placed on the nightstand. But when breakfast time came, her seat was empty. Her absence was strange, but not alarming at first. Perhaps she was at the chapel, lost in prayer. Hours later, when she failed to appear for her afternoon class with the children, Sister Miriam, the Mother Superior, went to check her room. What she found was unsettling. Evelyn's suitcase was gone, her passport missing from the locked drawer, and her travel documents nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind was a single sheet of paper placed neatly on her desk, bearing a short, handwritten note. "I must follow what my heart has seen." It made no sense. Evelyn had no known family outside the convent, no personal connections that could call her away so suddenly. She had never spoken of visions, nor of any emotional turmoil. Yet that note sounded almost prophetic, as though she had been guided by something, or someone. The sisters alerted local authorities, who treated it first as a case of voluntary departure. But when her bank account showed a withdrawal made just hours before a one-way ticket was purchased from London to Cairo, the police realized something deeper was unfolding. Detectives began tracing her last known movements. Surveillance footage from Bristol Airport showed her dressed plainly in civilian clothes, her hair covered by a simple scarf, not her habit. She appeared calm, almost serene, walking through the terminal with a small brown leather bag. But when officers checked the passenger list, another name caught their attention: Marcus Ellery, a British archaeologist who had visited St. Bernadette's a few months earlier. He had given a lecture about biblical sites and ancient Christian relics. Evelyn had attended that talk. Witnesses recalled how she stayed behind afterward, asking him several questions about faith and archaeology. What began as curiosity had apparently grown into correspondence. Emails between them revealed a friendship rooted in intellectual discussion, but also a growing fascination with spiritual discovery. Marcus wrote about uncovering evidence of early Christian worship hidden beneath Egyptian ruins. Evelyn responded with passages from Scripture, describing faith as a bridge between the seen and unseen. Their exchanges grew more intense, filled with shared wonder about destiny and divine purpose. Then, suddenly, the messages stopped. By the time police contacted Marcus's family, he too had vanished. He had told colleagues he was returning to Egypt for a private expedition, but no one knew why or with whom. That was when the pattern became clear. Sister Evelyn had followed him. The woman who had once devoted her life to peace and prayer had stepped into a world of dust, secrets, and danger. No one could understand what she had seen that made her leave everything behind. And as days turned into weeks, the quiet halls of St. Bernadette's filled with whispers of something darker. That perhaps what Evelyn followed to Cairo was not faith at all, but a calling that would lead her into the heart of a mystery far beyond her understanding. Cairo was unlike anything Sister Evelyn Harrow had ever known. The moment she stepped out of the airport, the air felt alive, thick with heat, dust, and the echo of thousands of voices. The sun burned against the stone walls and gold domes, painting everything in shades of fire. Dressed in a modest linen dress and scarf, she carried her worn brown bag close to her chest, holding the small cross pendant hidden beneath her clothes. She looked both out of place and deeply at peace, as if she had come to the one place where her doubts could finally rest. Waiting for her near the exit was a man, Marcus Ellery. Tall, slightly disheveled, his pale face glistening with sweat, he seemed restless, scanning the crowd again and again. When their eyes met, he nodded once and turned toward the exit. Evelyn followed. From that moment, their story began to dissolve into mystery. The pair checked into a quiet guest house tucked between narrow streets near Cairo's famous Khan el-Khalili market. It was the kind of place travelers stayed when they didn't want to be found. No cameras, no paperwork beyond a scribbled name in a logbook. The locals remembered the woman with the soft voice who prayed in the courtyard at dawn, and the man who barely spoke at all. At night, faint hymns drifted through the window of their room, blending with the city's endless hum. Some nights, Marcus left alone, returning before sunrise with sand on his shoes and a distant, feverish look in his eyes. After several days, they departed without a word. The guest house owner later told police that before leaving, Evelyn had covered the room's mirror with a white cloth and placed a single flower beneath it, a gesture that no one could explain. From Cairo, they traveled south to Luxor by train, a journey through the desert that seemed to pull them further away from everything familiar. Witnesses remembered them sitting side by side in silence, her hands folded in prayer, his clutching a leather notebook filled with sketches and notes about ancient sites. In Luxor, the story grew stranger. They visited a restricted archaeological zone, a forgotten dig site surrounded by sand and half-buried stones. Marcus had worked there years before under a research permit that was no longer valid. When locals asked why he had returned, he claimed to be looking for a lost Christian symbol hidden beneath the ruins, a relic said to mark the burial of early martyrs. Evelyn's presence drew attention. Some said she seemed detached, moving through the site with an air of quiet devotion, whispering prayers as if trying to bless the land. Others noticed her growing unease. She began writing constantly in a small notebook, refusing to show anyone what was inside. Then came the argument. One evening, a local guide saw Marcus in a heated confrontation with a man known to deal in black market artifacts. Their voices were low but tense, their gestures sharp. Hours later, the dealer vanished from Luxor, and Marcus looked more agitated than ever. He and Evelyn returned to their hotel, but by morning they were gone again. Their room was spotless, beds made, belongings missing, but the Bible Evelyn carried was left behind on the nightstand, open to a passage from Exodus about wandering in the wilderness. That was the last confirmed sighting of either of them. Days passed, then weeks. The desert around Luxor grew quieter as the search for them expanded, but no trace appeared. Police questioned guides, hotel staff, even smugglers, yet every lead ended the same way, with silence. It was as if the desert had swallowed them whole. The British Embassy filed missing persons reports, but Cairo's authorities had seen too many disappearances to hope for answers. To most, it became another unsolved case of two foreigners lost in the sands. But to those who had met them, especially those who remembered the calm devotion in Evelyn's eyes, there was a lingering sense that something larger than human reason had taken hold, that whatever drew her to Egypt had not yet released her from its grasp. 2 months after Sister Evelyn Harrow vanished into the heat of Luxor, the Egyptian police had all but abandoned the search. Her case had grown cold, and the desert does not return what it swallows easily. Then, one morning, a shepherd tending his flock near the outskirts of a ruined temple made a strange discovery. Beneath the cracked earth, half buried in sand, lay a small wooden box. It was simple in design, its edges worn smooth by time, but it was sealed tight, as if whoever buried it had wanted it hidden forever. When authorities opened it, they found a water-stained Bible wrapped in white cloth. Inside the Bible, tucked between the pages, was an old photograph. Sister Evelyn, standing beside a wall of hieroglyphs, her eyes closed and her hands pressed together in prayer. The photograph appeared new, its edges sharp, suggesting it had been taken shortly before her disappearance. On the last page of the Bible, a note had been inserted, handwritten in Latin. "The covenant has been fulfilled." The discovery reignited the investigation. Forensic teams combed the desert site, uncovering faint traces of a camp, a burned patch of sand, fragments of fabric, and a broken rosary chain. DNA analysis later confirmed that the remnants of clothing found belonged to Evelyn, but there was no sign of Marcus Ellery. Not his body, not his belongings, not even a footprint. What puzzled investigators most was how the box had been buried deep enough to require deliberate effort. Someone had taken the time to conceal it carefully, perhaps even as part of a ritual. The message in Latin suggested intention, not accident. When detectives searched Marcus's storage locker in Cairo, what they found only deepened the mystery. Inside were field maps of the Luxor area marked with red ink, copies of ancient Christian texts, and several pages filled with his handwriting, lines that made little sense, full of fragmented thoughts about a divine doorway and the renewal of the blood covenant. Among the papers was a plane ticket booked under a false name that was never used. Police theorized Marcus had staged his disappearance and fled the country, but no departure record existed under any of his known aliases. It was as if he had never left Egypt at all. Speculation spread quickly both in England and Cairo. Some believed Evelyn had been deceived, drawn into a dangerous search for an artifact that Marcus believed held religious power. Others insisted she had gone willingly, convinced by Marcus's ideas about the intersection of faith and archaeology. The Vatican was quietly notified, but officials declined to comment, saying only that Sister Evelyn's soul rests in God's hands. Months later, locals began telling stories of strange lights seen near the temple ruins and whispers of a woman in white walking the dunes at dusk. Archaeologists who returned to the site reported an eerie stillness, as though the air itself resisted disturbance. Nothing of value was ever found there again. The site was eventually sealed off, its location removed from official records. Back in Bristol, the convent received Evelyn's Bible through diplomatic mail. The pages were brittle, heavy with the scent of sand. The Mother Superior placed it in a glass case within the chapel, where it remains untouched. Some of the sisters claim that on quiet nights, when candles flicker and the air feels heavy, they can hear faint murmurs coming from the case. Soft words in Latin. None of them can translate. Whether born of imagination or faith, the convent treats it as a sign that Evelyn's spirit has not yet found peace. For the authorities, the case was eventually marked unresolved. For those who knew her, it was a wound that refused to close. The woman who had once lived by vows of silence and devotion had become part of a mystery no one could explain, her story ending not in revelation, but in the hollow echo of a desert wind that still seemed to whisper her name. As investigators dug deeper into Marcus Ellery's background, the picture that emerged was far more complicated than anyone expected. He had not been a rogue academic chasing discovery. He had been a man haunted by something that seemed to live between faith and madness. His former colleagues at Oxford described him as brilliant but increasingly unstable. Years before meeting Sister Evelyn, Marcus had led an archaeological team in Sudan, where a flash flood buried one of their sites and claimed the life of his fiancée, an archaeologist named Helen Ward. After her death, Marcus abandoned teaching and began publishing obscure papers about lost Christian sects and hidden covenants buried under the Nile. In his personal notes, investigators found obsessive references to a prophecy he claimed had been misinterpreted for centuries, one that promised redemption through revelation beneath the desert. The emails between Marcus and Evelyn hinted at this growing obsession. What began as intellectual exchange gradually turned spiritual. Marcus wrote about discovering an inscription that spoke of a covenant sealed in blood and sand. He believed early Christians had fled Roman persecution and hidden sacred texts in Egypt, somewhere near Luxor. Evelyn's responses were measured and devout, but one could sense her curiosity deepening. She asked about faith as discovery, about truth hidden beneath history. In her final email she wrote, "I have prayed, and I am certain I must see it for myself." Police found Evelyn's private journal in her convent locker, its pages filled with entries that began serene but grew increasingly troubled. The early passages spoke of a calling and a light in the desert. But as the days neared her disappearance, her words darkened. One line stood out. "He believes he has been chosen, but I fear the voice that calls him is not divine." It was the first sign that Evelyn might have realized too late what kind of path she had stepped onto. Marcus's flat in London provided even more disturbing evidence. Alongside maps and excavation sketches were handwritten notes describing visions of a pale figure guiding him through the sands, of whispers during prayer, of a woman cloaked in white standing at the mouth of a tomb. These visions intensified after Helen's death, suggesting that his grief had twisted into a religious delusion. For Marcus, Egypt was no longer just a site of research. It had become a stage for spiritual resurrection, one he believed Evelyn was destined to witness. A particularly chilling discovery came in the form of an unfinished letter found among his belongings. It read, "She must be the vessel. Only through her will the covenant be seen." Investigators debated whether this indicated intent to harm Evelyn or a symbolic statement from a man losing his grip on reality, but combined with his earlier research, it suggested a dangerous fixation. Marcus saw Evelyn not as a partner, but as part of his prophecy. Those who had studied his work noted a disturbing shift in his tone after he arrived in Egypt. His field diary, later recovered from a Cairo antiques dealer, contained sketches of crosses merging with Egyptian symbols and cryptic notes about purifying the soul through the desert's silence. It became increasingly clear that Marcus was chasing not an artifact, but a revelation that existed only in his mind. By the time authorities pieced these fragments together, both Marcus and Evelyn were long gone. The conclusion investigators reached was that their shared journey had transformed into something neither of them understood. What began as faith-driven exploration had turned into a dangerous pilgrimage, one guided not by God, but by a man consumed by grief, obsession, and the illusion of divine purpose. The truth behind their fate remained buried with the sands, leaving behind only the haunting question of how devotion could turn so easily into delusion. Months after Sister Evelyn's disappearance had faded from headlines, the Egyptian authorities quietly closed her case. There were no new leads, no witnesses, and no reason to believe she or Marcus Ellery would ever be found. The desert, vast and merciless, does not often return its secrets. Yet for one local officer named Hassan el-Sayed, something about the case refused to let go. He had been among the first to see the Bible recovered from the sands near Luxor, and its message, "The covenant has been fulfilled," haunted him. On his days off, Hassan would revisit the area, walking through the dunes alone, convinced there was something left undiscovered. One afternoon, as the wind howled through the ruins of the old temple, he noticed a faint indentation in the ground, half covered by drifting sand. It was the outline of stone, too smooth and deliberate to be natural. When he began to dig, the earth gave way to reveal the entrance of a narrow passage. The tunnel led down into a small underground chamber, no larger than a storage room. Inside, the air was dry and heavy, thick with centuries of stillness. A single beam of light from Hassan's flashlight swept across the walls, revealing faded symbols, some Egyptian, some Christian. In the center of the chamber stood a mound of stones, carefully stacked. Beneath them, half buried in dust, lay two objects: a simple wooden cross and a weathered Bible, identical to the one found months earlier. The Bible's pages had yellowed, and the cover was cracked. When Hassan opened it, he froze. The book had been turned to a verse from Revelation 6:8, "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death." In the margin, written in trembling handwriting, were the words, "The seal is broken." The handwriting matched Marcus Ellery's. No bodies were found in the chamber, but the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Had Marcus sealed himself inside willingly, believing he was fulfilling some divine purpose? Or had someone else buried the chamber after whatever ritual had taken place? Forensic teams returned to the site, but there was little left to analyze. No fingerprints, no human remains, no trace of struggle. Only the eerie sense that whoever had been there had chosen to vanish completely. Back in Cairo, the British embassy received Hassan's report, but it was quietly suppressed. Officials feared public speculation about religious fanaticism involving a nun and a scholar would draw unwanted attention. The story was quietly labeled Unsolved Disappearance, and the files were sealed. Yet within archaeological circles, whispers spread of a hidden text that Marcus might have found and then destroyed, something powerful enough to make him believe he had completed a sacred mission. At St. Bernadette's convent, the second Bible was sent under diplomatic protection and placed beside Evelyn's original one. The sisters refused to open it. They believed whatever message lay inside was not meant for human eyes. Some nights, the Mother Superior claimed to hear faint scratching from within the glass case, as if the pages were being turned by unseen hands. The younger nuns avoided the chapel after dusk, saying they sometimes smelled the desert wind drifting through the windows, carrying with it a whisper of Evelyn's name. In time, both Evelyn and Marcus became stories told in hushed tones, a warning of how faith, when consumed by obsession, can become a doorway to something unholy. The convent preserved her belongings, the police archived their files, and the sands of Luxor reclaimed the chamber once more. But for those who still believe, the mystery never ended. They say that under certain stars, when the desert is silent and the air stands still, a figure in white can be seen walking near the ruins. Her hands clasped around a Bible, her eyes searching for something lost. Whether it is redemption or rest, no one can say. The only certainty is that Sister Evelyn Harrow's final journey did not end in Egypt's desert. It began there.